In the end of this week's PARSHA, Perek Chav Daled, we have the story of the bris, the covenant that was made over the Torah, the covenant between the Bnei Yisrael and the Ribono Shel Olam. It says in the pasuk, "Vayovel Moshe came, Vayisaper la'am es kol divrei Hashem." He told the people all the words of Hashem, Veis kol Mishpatim, and all the laws. Vayan kol ha'am kol echad v'yomru. Everyone answered in one voice, Kol ha'dvarim asher diber Hashem na'aseh. Whatever Hashem said, we will do. Vayichtov Moshe es kol divrei Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu wrote all the words of Hashem. Vayashkem b'bok. He got up the next morning. He built a mizbeach. He brought korbanos. He sprinkled the blood. Vayikach sefer habris. He took the sefer habris which he had written the day before. Vayikra ba'aznei ha'am. He read it to the people. Vayomer, when they said, Kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh v'nishma. They said na'aseh v'nishma. Moshe took the blood and he sprinkled it on the people. Vayomer, and he said, Hinei dam habris. Behold, this is the blood of the covenant. Asher karas Hashem imachem, that Hashem has made with you. Al kol hadvarim ha'ela. So there's a ceremony, there's a krisas bris. The reading of the sefer bris, the sprinkling of the blood, the acceptance of Na'aseh v'nishma. This is the bris. There's a machlokas rishonim exactly when this took place. The sheet of Rashi, and this is based on the Gemara and Shabbos, is that this entire parsha really was before the giving of Yeseres HaDibros. That Moshe Rabbeinu was telling the people the Mishpatim took place on Daled Sivan. And the Mishpatim that are referred to here are the mitzvahs that had been given before in Morah. Kibbud Avoim, Paraduma, Dinim. And the next morning, on the 5th of Sivan, this is when Moshe built the Mizbeach, and this is when Klal Yisrael said Na'aseh v'nishma, and the revelation, Har Sinai, the Yeseres HaDibros, took place either the next day on Vav Sivan, or according to another opinion, 2 days later on Zayin Sivan. But this story of the Krisas Bris, although it's recorded at the end of Parshas Mishpatim, really took place before the events that are described in Parshas Yisro. That's the sheet of Rashi. It's based on the Gemara Masechah Shabbos. The Ramban, Al Pi Ibn Ezra, says that the Parshias are really Keseder. The Parshias are in order. And this is how they're to be understood. On the 6th of Sivan was the revelation on Har Sinai, the giving of the Yeseres HaDibros. On that same day, the Ribono Shel Olam expanded upon the Yeseres HaDibros and gave Moshe Rabbeinu supplementary information and mitzvahs that related to the Yeseres HaDibros. So if you go back to the end of Parshas Yisro, after the Yeseres HaDibros, in the end of the Parsha, we have several mitzvahs that are mentioned. It says, Lo sasu niti, Elohei chesed, Elohei zav, Lo sasu lochem, don't make idols of silver and gold, make a mizbeach of earth, and so on and so forth. Says the Ramban that these are mitzvahs that are meant to supplement the Yeseres HaDibros. And then we have Mishpatim, 3 prakim filled with mitzvahs, dinim, which are also, as we'll see in a few moments, an expansion of the Yeseres HaDibros. And these were all said to Moshe Rabbeinu on the day of the revelation. And Moshe Rabbeinu then reported these mitzvahs to the Bnei Yisrael. He wrote them down, and the next morning he read the Sefer HaBris, and the Sefer HaBris, according to the Ramban, means all the mitzvahs that are in the end of Parshas Yisro and in the first 3 prakim of Parshas Mishpatim. And that Klal Yisrael said Na'aseh v'nishma. And after that, Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai for the next 40 days to receive the rest of the Torah. And therefore the Parshias are in order. And in fact, according to the Ramban, the Na'aseh v'nishma took place after the revelation of the Yeseres HaDibros. The Aseret Dibris were revealed on Vav Sivan, and Nasa V'Nishma was said on the next day after Moshe Rabbeinu read the Sefer HaBris. That's the sheet of the Ramban. It's unconventional. We always assume the other way. That's the simple reading of the Gemara Masechah Shabbos. But the Ramban says that there are midrashim that go this way, and the Ramban says we should embrace those midrashim because according to those midrashim, the parshias are in order. And the rule of ein muktam mucher b'Torah, that the Torah doesn't follow chronological order, we only say when we're compelled to. But if there's any way to explain the parshias that they do follow chronological order, we do so. This is the approach of the Ramban. Let's understand this idea of the Sefer HaBris, of the Krisas Bris. Because what is the idea that there has to be a reading of the Sefer HaBris for the covenant? Now, by analogy, we know when a ger is megayer, when a convert enters the fold, so the halacha is, the Gemara says in Yavamas, that modiyun also mixas mitzvahs kalas, mixas mitzvahs chamuras. You have to inform the ger of a sampling of mitzvahs. Difficult ones, easy ones, you give him a cross-section of mitzvahs, and on that basis he accepts Judaism. Now, the idea is pashut. You can't teach him the entire Torah. Obviously that's impossible. But you can't, on the other hand, teach him nothing. Because on what basis is he accepting the Yadus? He has to have some inkling, some idea of what it's all about. So you give him a sampling. Every religion has cardinal sins, and there are minor sins. So you give him a cross-section. Mixes mitzvahs chamuras, a few very difficult ones. Mixes mitzvahs kalas, a few easy ones. So he has an idea of what Yiddishkeit is all about, although you're not teaching him the entire Torah, but he has a good idea. On that basis, he accepts. So by analogy, if there's a bris, there's a covenant which is being made with Ribono Shloim on the Torah, so Klal Yisrael has to be informed of a cross-section of mitzvahs. But the mitzvahs are only going to be given to Moshe Rabbeinu afterward. He's only going up for the 40 days after this bris. So therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Moshe Rabbeinu certain mitzvahs immediately following the Aseret Dibros. Those are the mitzvahs that conclude Parshas Yisro and the first 3 chapters of Parshas Mishpatim. These are the mitzvahs kalas, mitzvahs chamura, so to speak. This is the sampling of mitzvahs, on the basis of which Klal Yisrael made a bris with the Ribono Shloim, and they said Nasa v'Nishma, and then Moshe Rabbeinu goes up to receive the rest of the Torah. But there's a problem over here. And the problem is this. Then when we think of a bris, we think of a covenant. What is the idea of a covenant? A covenant is that which is unique to the two parties of the covenant, to the exclusion of all others. If we're going to have a selection of mitzvahs, which is meant to be the basis of the Krisas Bris, we should assume that the mitzvahs that would be chosen would be mitzvahs that would be unique to Klal Yisrael. Mitzvahs that would exemplify the bris, the unique covenant that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made with Klal Yisrael to the exclusion of all other nations. But it comes out that, according to the Ramban, the bulk of the Sefer HaBris is comprised of Mishpatim. And Mishpatim aren't unique to Klal Yisrael. The Umas Ha'olam, the Bnei Noach also have dinim. And you may remember, one of the Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Noach is dinim. What does that mean, dinim? Bnei Noach have dinim. So there's a machlokes Rambam and the Ramban on this point, back in Parshas V'Yishlach. Now the Rambam says the idea that Bnei Noach are commanded on dinim is that they are obligated to establish courts of law to enforce the other 6 mitzvahs Bnei Noach, Avodah Zarah, Gezel, Arayas, and so on and so forth. That's the geder of dinim. That there's a mitzvah to appoint batei din, courts of law, which in turn enforce the other 6 of the 7 mitzvahs. The Ramban argues, and the Ramban says that when Chazal say Bnei Noach and Nitztavu ala dinim, it means all the dinim that Klal Yisrael have. The dinim of shoyimrim, of guardsmen, the dinim of hezek, of damages, of loans, and so on and so forth. All the laws that are in Parshas Mishpatim, the Bnei Noach are commanded to follow, just like we do. That's the Ramban Shita. So it comes out, according to the Ramban himself, Mishpatim is the one area of halacha which is not unique to Klal Yisrael. Bnei Noach are muchiyah to follow the Mishpatim as well. That's the mitzvah of dinim that Bnei Noach are commanded on. So if we were coming to compose the Sefer HaBris, the Book of the Covenant, the listing of laws which would give Klal Yisrael a clue as to the special relationship they're going to have with the Ribono Shel Olam, we would have chosen things specific to Klal Yisrael, the laws of kashrus perhaps, that's a very Jewish thing, or the laws of Korbanos, the Beis HaMikdash, it's a Jewish thing, the laws of Tumah and Tara, Shabbos, we would have picked those mitzvahs. Instead, the Sefer HaBris, according to the Ramban, is comprised of Mishpatim, and the Frat Ramban L'Shitaso, the Mishpatim apply to Bnei Noach as well. So how is that the content of the Sefer HaBris? How is that a sampling of mitzvahs which exemplify the special relationship with Klal Yisrael and the Ribono Shel Olam? On that basis, Klal Yisrael would enter the bris and say Nasiv and Ishmael. Doesn't make sense. Okay, it's one question. Put that in the back burner. The Ramban writes, in the beginning of the Parsha, the Ramban writes that the reason the Mishpatim are written after the Aseret HaDibros, the Ramban brings a Medrash Rabbah, which says, Kol HaTorah Tluya B'Mishpatim, that the entire Torah depends on Mishpatim. Mishpatim are the basis of the entire Torah. Rabbi Eliezer brings this Ramban, and he brings an amazing remes to this, an amazing hint to this Ramban. He brings a pasuk in Mishlei. It says in Mishlei, Gam Eila Lachachamim, that these proverbs are also for the Chachamim. In other words, you learn Mishlei, you think that the proverbs are meant for young people, children. No, Gam Eila Lachachamim. These proverbs are also for the Chachamim. Haker Panim B'Mishpat Bal Toiv. Because showing favoritism in judgment is not good. So even professional dayanim need to learn the lessons of Mishlei to avoid corrupting, perverting justice by being makir panim, by showing favoritism. But the wording of the pasuk is hakir panim b'mishpat, recognizing faces, showing favoritism. Baal toiv. Baal toiv is not good. And Rabbi Eliezer wonders, that's a very curious choice of words. Normally we would have expected it to say lo tov. It's not good. What does it mean, Baal tov? It means the same thing, but it's an unusual word, Baal. So it says Rabbi Eliezer, it's a remez to the Beis of Bereshis, which is the first letter of the Torah, and the Lamed of La'enei Kol Yisrael, which is the last letter of the Torah. That Haker Panim B'Mishpat Baal Toiv, because the entire Torah, from the Beis of Bereshis to the Lamed of Yisrael, is all dependent on Mishpatim. And therefore, Shlomo Aluch hinted this by using the word Baal instead of the more conventional word Lo. Speaking about Mishpat and showing favoritism in Mishpat, Baal Tov, it's not good to do so. It's a corruption of the entire Torah, from the Beis of Bereshis to the Lamed of La'enei Kol Yisrael. So it's a tremendous remes to this idea that the entire Torah is dependent on Mishpatim. Now, at first glance, it's hard to understand. I mean, is Mishpatim such an important, such a central theme to the Torah? If I would ask you, what is the central idea of the Torah? Now, if you'd want to sum up the entire Torah, is there a single theme that runs through beginning to end, through the halachas of the Torah? I might have said that perhaps it's the battle against Avodah Zarah. It's a campaign to affirm a certain conception of God against foreign conceptions of God that like the Zohar embraced. I would have said that's the fundamental idea of Torah. But to say that the entire Torah is really based on Mishpatim, that the laws of civil law, criminal law, this is really the central thing in Torah, it's hard to understand exactly what it means. Okay, that's the second question. Let's put that on the back burner. There's a third interesting thing. The Ramban explains that the Mishpatim are really an expansion of the Aseres HaDibros. Which of the Aseres HaDibros? Of Lo Sachmoid. But the last of the Aseres HaDibros is the prohibition not to covet, not to desire that which belongs to another person. So, in order to avoid Lo Sachmoid, it's necessary to establish what is mine and what is the other person's. Because as long as it's mine, I have no reason not to covet it. If it's mine, I'm allowed to desire it. If it's someone else's, I can't desire it. So therefore you have to establish what is mine and what is the other person's. And that's why we need Mishpatim. You need Mishpatim, you need to know what the laws of fields are, and what the laws of houses are, and what the laws of loans are. And this way you can establish what is mine and what is his, and thereby you can avoid Lo Sachmoid. It seems very, very odd. And we have a Aseres HaDibros. And we have many, many central ideas in the Aseres HaDibros. The belief in the Ribono Shel Olam, and the Isra of Avodah Zarah, and Shabbos, and Kibbud Av V'Aim, and Lo Yirtzach. It seems that an inordinate amount of attention is devoted to the expansion of Lo Sachmoid. Whereas we don't find that any of the other dibros are expanded upon to such great length, specifically Lo Sachmoid, that it's this idea not to covet. Here we have all the Mishpatim and all the laws and all the Dinei Mamanas, which are, as the Ramban says, just in order to provide the basis for Lo Sachmoid. It seems that is Lo Sachmoid the most important of the Aseres HaDibros? It would seem to me that it's probably the most frequently violated. But it's hard to imagine that, like, this is the Bakol Mikol Koil of everything, that the Torah should feel the need to elaborate on this more than any of the other 9. It's something which also requires understanding. We tend to think that the importance of Mishpatim is that in the absence of Mishpatim, the world would fall into a state of anarchy. That's why Mishpatim are very important. If there were no laws, no standards of justice, so it would be every man against every other man. We'd be living in a state of perpetual conflict, tension, violence perhaps. And that's why we have to have Mishpatim. It's an interesting thing. If you think about that for a moment, you come to an amazing conclusion. That the bikush, the quest for judgment, should really be on the part of the weak, not on the part of the strong. The people who have power, who have strength, don't need mishpatim. They can fend for themselves. Because who wants justice? The weak want justice. The weak want justice to be protected from the strong.
Strong want order.
The strong want the opportunity to exercise their strength without restraint. A person who's really strong doesn't want justice, right? He wants power. If he has power, he'd rather not have justice. He'd rather have the opportunity to exercise power. The tviyah, the argument, the demand for justice is usually on the part of the weak. It's really a medrash. The medrash says an amazing thing. Beginning of this parsha, Medrash Tanchuma. On the pasuk Ve'ela Mishpatim, Zeh Shamar HaKasuv. This is an allusion to what the pasuk says in Tehillim. Va'oz melech mishpat ohev. The strength of our king, of the Ribono Shel Olam, is his love of justice. This is what the Medrash says. Kol ha'oz ve'ashevach va'gdula va'gvura. The strength and the praise and the greatness and the power shel melech malchei hamlachim, of the king of kings, who mishpat ohev, is his love for justice. B'nayig sheba'olam, normally, the way things go in the world, mishu bal zraya, a person who has power, eino rotze lasos devar b'mishpat. He doesn't want to do things in accordance with justice. Elamaver el mishpat. He wants to violate justice. Chaymes the Gezel. He extorts and he steals. Umaver el das kono. And he transgresses the will of his creator. V'nei panim lifnei ayavov. Ukroivov, he shows favoritism to his friends and to his relatives. V'aisa shlokadin l'sainav. He does shlokadin to his enemies. That's the way it is. His power does not seek justice. I'll give you an example. A very, very important example of this. We talk about justice. We really have to think in terms of a balance sheet. Because if we take money from Reuven and give it to Shimon, we have to answer two questions. One is, why does Shimon deserve to get it? And why does Reuven deserve to lose it? Because if you can't answer both questions, then you have to leave things as they are. Because it can't just be that since there are a lot of people that want this money, therefore we have to take it away from whoever has it and give it to the people who want it. That's not consistent with any principle of justice. Because the principle of justice has to justify both, our taking it away from Reuven and our giving it to Shimon. So when we hear discussions in the news today, if you follow the news south of the border, of mandates under the health law that would cause religious organizations to provide services which they are opposed to philosophically. So you have a situation where much of the discussion in favor of the government's position is simply people saying, well, this is what people want. People want these services. People want contraceptives. People want abortions. People want this. Well, this is what the people want, so the government should give it to them. To me, Lefi ani yazdaiti, perhaps I'm not so bright, but it seems to me that the discussion is not addressing the point. The point is not whether people want this or even are entitled to it. You have to answer the other question too. But by what right do you make people pay for it? By what right do you make people pay for it? How can the government tell, whether it's Catholic organizations or whatever, that you have to pay for things which you are religiously opposed to? It's not a question whether the beneficiaries want this service or not. That's not enough. It's not enough to say that we want it. That only makes sense if government's position is, since we have the power, we can do whatever we want, and if our chosen beneficiaries want these services, by God, we're going to give it to them. Then it makes sense. It makes no difference who we're taking the money from. But if you're not thinking in terms of pure power, you're thinking in terms of justice, justice has to be justified at both ends. Not only why the recipients deserve to get it, but why the benefactors should be obligated to pay it. If you can't answer that question, then you have no right to impose your will upon the people. Okay, that's a little bit of political commentary. But the point is that power often tends to ignore the principles of justice. That doesn't mean to say, by the way, they don't claim to be acting in the name of justice. No, they'll claim and they'll say it till they've exhausted all our patience. They'll say that this is all about justice and equality and fairness and so on and so forth. It's about sheer abuse of power. We can do it, so we will do it. Right? And we'll take it from whoever we want to take it, and we'll give it to whoever we want to give it. Why? Because we can. Because we're able to. But that's not the way the Rebbeinu Shalom works. Aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Melech Malchem Lachem Mishpat Ahev. He loves Mishpat. Eino Oised Dvarav Elav Mishpat. Everything he does is rooted in justice. Having, and this is the meaning of the pasuk, V'oiz Melech Mishpat Ahev. that the strength of our king is his love of justice. And of course, this is the phraseology which has been incorporated into the Shmoneh. We say, Melach Ohev Tzedakah Mishpat. Mefarshim asked the question of all the brachas in Shmoneh, why is that bracha unique in that it mentions the word Melach in the Chasima? And the answer is, of course, it's based on this pasuk. Oiz Melach Mishpat Ohev. So therefore, he's Melach Ohev Tzedakah Mishpat. He's the God who loves justice. What do we see from here? We see from here that there's a totally different conception of justice. As we said, if the purpose of justice is simply to save ourselves from anarchy, then the tviyah, the claim for justice, is always on the part of the weak. The strong, to the contrary, they'll use their strength to advance their own interests. There's no one who's stronger or more powerful than the Ribono Shel Olam, and yet he loves mishpat, he loves justice. Why does he love justice? It's for a different reason. It's not out of self-interest. It's not to protect his own interests that he wants justice. It's because the Ribono Shel Olam created the world with a certain plan. There's a certain objective that he has. And that objective is realized through mishpat. Mishpat is the seder, is the order of things as the Ribono Shel Olam wants them to be. And that's why he loves it. Because this is really the realization, this is the actualization of his plan for the Bria, for the cosmos, that everything should be apportioned in accordance with principles of Mishpat. We've said in the past, the very, very beautiful Gemara in Masechah Shabbos, that says, Kol dayan shadon din emes la'amito, afilu sha'achas b'yoyim. Any judge who judges correctly, even for 1 hour during the day, nasa shutaf l'kadosh baruch hu b'ma'aseh b'reishis. He becomes a partner of the Ribono Shel Olam in the very act of creation. So what is the idea of all the things, all the commendable deeds, being done in emes la'amito as a shutaf l'kadosh baruch hu b'ma'aseh b'reishis? Only in that you become a partner with the Ribono Shel Olam b'ma'aseh b'reishis. The answer is very simple. Because Ma'aseh B'reishis is a plan. There's a plan. Hashem made the world for a purpose. He had a cheshbon. There's a plan in mind. Everything has its place. This belongs here. This belongs there. This belongs to this person. This belongs to this person. And injustice is a corruption of that plan. It's a corruption of God's blueprint for the Bria itself. The dayan who's dan din emes la'amito, the judge who judges correctly, restores things to where they're meant to be, and therefore that judge is taka God's partner in Ma'aseh B'reishis. The truth is, when you think about it for a moment, you discover an amazing thing. That this issue, whether the desire of God is to exercise power, or the desire of God is justice, is really the fundamental difference between the conception of God of the Rabbi Eliezer Breitowitz and the conception of God of the Torah. In other words, if I would ask you, what is the difference between the way the Ummah Ha'olam conceive of God, and what is the difference between the way Klal Yisrael conceives of God? So you might say that we are monotheistic, they are polytheistic, you might think of all sorts of differences. But the real difference is this, that the gods of the mythologies, of the Babylonians, the Greeks, Romans, whatever, they were people or beings that had desires, that had wants, that had needs. They were very powerful. And therefore, the worship of the Avodah Zarah is in a sense a type of exchange, type of barter. There are things that the gods can provide mankind that we want. We want the rain, and we want the fertility of the soil, and so on and so forth. And that the gods can provide. The gods want to be stroked, they want to be praised, they want to be worshipped, they want to be adored. So therefore there's an exchange, there's a barter. Right? We will ingratiate ourselves to the gods, maybe we'll even grovel before the gods, we'll give them what they want, in the hope that they'll give us what we in turn want. So we'll sacrifice a few virgins to them, and they'll give us the rain and victory in war, or whatever it'll be. It's a barter. It's an exchange. It's just all about power. In other words, the gods have power. We would like them to exercise that power in our benefit. So therefore, we'll give them what they want. They'll give us what we want, and everyone will be happy. That's what it's all about. It's not about justice. It's not about what is right. It's not about morality. It's simply about exchange, barter, buying and selling. We'll give them what they want. They'll give us what we want, and everything will be settled. And it's a very interesting thing that although in Greek literature there is a tradition of ethical thinking, Aristotle wrote books in ethics, so on and so forth, but the truth is that the ethics did not emerge from the religious tradition of the Greeks. These are two different things, two different departments. Now you have the religious life of the Greeks, which was pagan, and then on the side there was philosophical thinking that discussed ethics and even developed quite elaborate systems of ethics, but the two had nothing to do with each other. Religion and ethics were totally unrelated. Totally unrelated. The gods were not depicted as being very ethical people at all, ethical beings. They were petty, and they were jealous, and they were contentious, and they were always fighting with each other, and they hardly were role models for the good ethical life. They had the faults of the lowest of the human beings multiplied and magnified many times over. And that's PARSHA, how the scheme was meant to work. If you think of your God not as an exemplar of virtue, but you see him as a possessor of power, so exactly like the Medrash Tanchuma says, if you have power, you don't think in terms of mishpat, you think in terms of power. You'll show favoritism to your cronies, to your friends, and so on and so forth. So I have an opportunity to be on the good side of the deity, of Zeus or Jupiter or whoever it is, then that's what I'll do. So if it means sacrificing to him, it means building temples to him, it means adoring his statue, whatever it is, so that's how I turn myself into his friend, and then he'll show favoritism to me, and it's crony capitalism. That's all it is. So, Klal Yisrael's conception of God is very different. Klal Yisrael's conception of God is that we have a God who is totally omnipotent, totally self-sufficient. He has no emotional needs, and therefore he doesn't need our worship. He certainly doesn't need our sacrifices. He doesn't need the meat, doesn't need the wine. So what does he want? If he needs nothing, what does he want? He wants justice. He wants morality. He wants truth. That's what he wants. And therefore, v'oiz melech mishpat ahev, the glory of the Ribono Shel Olam, the shevach, the praise of the Ribono Shel Olam is his love of justice. That is what it's all about. And therefore, when we do justice, we act in a manner which is just, then we are satisfying what the Ribono Shel Olam wants, and the Ribono Shel Olam in turn rewards us, but it's not about power, it's about justice. And it's a totally different conception of the God than the Avodah Zarah had. So getting back to the questions we began with. So the Mishpatim of the Torah are very, very different than the Mishpatim of the Bnei Noach. The Mishpatim of the Bnei Noach are, as we always assume, to prevent anarchy, to prevent instability, to prevent warfare, violence. So they have Mishpatim. This is as far as the Rishonim explain, that the purpose of the mitzvahs Bnei Noach are in order to create an orderly society, and therefore Dinim is Bechlal. Dinim is an important element of that. The Mishpatim of Klal Yisrael are totally different. And we said this many times over from the Drasha Saran, that the Ran says that Klal Yisrael's Mishpatim are not simply for the purpose of creating an orderly society. The Mishpatim of Klal Yisrael are Mishpat Tzedek, they are godly acts, they bring the Shefa HaEloki, the divine bounty to the world, precisely because they are acts which endear us to the Ribbono Shel Olam, which make us God-like. And so the Rosh explains that sometimes the Mishpatim don't allow for carrying out justice in ways that will be a deterrent to crime. As we know, the Mishnah in Makkah says that if a murderer is on trial, you have to ask so many questions to the Eidim that the likelihood of getting a conviction is very, very slim. So one of the Tamaim pointed out that if so, he'll be Yirbu Sheif Chedam Yisrael. He'll have many murderers. There'll be no deterrent. The Ran says, there'll be no deterrent. How do we prevent crime? There are other ways. The Melech has his own system of justice, and in the absence of a Melech, the Sanhedrin also can be manish lo menadin, because shot tzvich lakach. The times require it. But the pure mishpatim of the Torah are mishpat tzedek. They have to be absolutely correct, accurate judgments, because their purpose is not to deter crime or to allow and create an orderly society. Their purpose is to perform godly acts of mishpat and thereby elevate ourselves to the level of being godlike. And therefore they have to be 1,000% accurate. If there's any possibility of an error, then it isn't a godly act. That's the mishpatim of the Torah. And therefore, that's why the mishpatim of the Torah are the essence of the Sefer HaBris. They are exactly that which makes Klal Yisrael unique. And maybe over here, I should invoke a svara that the Maral says. A very, very interesting Maral. Footnote used to quote this Maral often. The Masechah Shabbos. We have a Masechah Shabbos. Talks about all the laws of Shabbos. Massive Masechah, 150 blot. Talking about the laws of Shabbos. Most of the Masechta follows chronological order. Somewhere in the middle of the first parak, it starts talking about Erev Shabbos and what you have to do before Shabbos, so you can't allow to continue on Shabbos. And then you have the Madlikin, about lighting the Shabbos candles, which is done Erev Shabbos, and so on and so forth. Then we get to Shabbos itself. There's a certain chronological seder. Yet, the first Mishnah Masechah Shabbos talks about the laws of carrying, which is one of the 39 malachas. Yetzias HaShabbos, carrying from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, and so on and so forth. So first of all, why do we deviate from the chronological order? Why do we start talking about this malacha and only then go back to the laws of Erev Shabbos? And secondly, we have 39 malachas. Why do we pick this one malacha of Haitzah? So the Maral says an amazing thing. The Maral says like this. The Maral says that the Mishnah is coming to contrast Shabbos to Yom Tov. So we want to compare two things that are very, very similar. Because what do you contrast? You contrast some nekuda, some point, which is different. Shabbos and Yom Tov are very, very similar. There's an Isser Malacha on Shabbos, there's an Isser Malacha on Yom Tov. So if you want to explain what is unique about Shabbos, you have to find the one difference. Where in the laws of Malacha is there a difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov? The answer is carrying. That's the one place where there's a difference. Carrying is mutter on Yom Tov, it's also on Shabbos. And therefore, since this is Masechah Shabbos, we want to explain the uniqueness of Shabbos, so we begin with a halacha which is unique to Shabbos as opposed to Yom Tov. Over here as well, if we want to establish the Sefer HaBris, so of course we can talk about the things that are very, very different, that only Klal Yisrael has. Only Klal Yisrael keeps kosher. Well, the Umas Olam may have some observance of their own, which is unique to them. I don't know what they have. But there may be something they do which is also unusual. So that really doesn't bring out the difference between Klal Yisrael and the Umas Olam. You have to find the thing which both have, and yet there's a difference. What is that? That's dinam. It says we both have dinam. The Bnei Noach have dinam, we also have dinam. But our dinam are different than their dinam. Their dinam are simply for the purpose of preventing civil war, preventing anarchy. Because our dinam are because these are Lo'ez Melech Mishpat Ahiv. This is what God loves. This is the Seder. This is the plan for the Bria. This is restoring the divine order to things. This is an act which is a godly act which turns us into godly people. That's our Mishpatim. That's why this is the Teichen. This is the fundamental content of the Sefer HaBris. Because what makes us unique is that the same things that the Umas Olam do, we do with a totally different kavanah, a totally different way, a totally different understanding. That is the essence of the bris. And that's why, Fakir, we asked the question that if we're writing a Sefer HaBris, which is going to explain exactly the basis of the covenant between Klal Yisrael and the Ribono Shel Olam, we should pick uniquely Jewish practices, not dinim, which are common to the Bnei Noach as well. The answer is, it's only in the most superficial sense that our dinim and the dinim of Bnei Noach are the same. It's true, their laws and our laws cover the same ground, and according to the Ramban, the laws are actually the same. But the kavanah and the intent and the underlying purpose is totally different. Two totally different systems. Therefore, this is really the content of the Sefer HaBris itself. And this is the idea that Kol Torah Kula, as the Medrash says, is Tluya b'Mishpat. The entire Torah is dependent on Mishpat. So we ask the question that L'chora, the real difference is the question of the conception of God, not the idea of Mishpat. But now we understand that it really is that way. That our conception of Mishpat is rooted in our conception of God. Their conception of Mishpat is rooted in their conception of God. Now, they're thinking in terms of power, and therefore Mishpat really is to protect the weak from that power. Whereas we think of a God who has a Seder, who has a plan, who has a scheme and a Ratzon for the Bria, and therefore the idea of Mishpat is related to that. The entire concept of Mishpat is rooted in our conception of God and His desires, and accordingly, that's why the Mishpat is really the basis of the entire Torah. Talk about Lo SHMOT. Now, there's a very famous Ibn Ezra in PARSHA Yisrael that asks the question that how is it possible for a person to be Nizra and Lo SHMOT? How can a person avoid the temptation of coveting another person's property? And it's an emotion, it's a feeling, it's natural. How is it possible that a person could overcome that? So Ibn Ezra gives a very famous answer. He says, imagine you had a village person, and one day he would see from afar the queen, princess. Would he have any desire to marry her? He says, of course not, because he knows it's an impossibility. He says, it can't be. He says, I'm a villager, I'm a country nobody. I should be able to marry the queen. It's impossible, inconceivable. So says Ibn Ezra, a person has to think the same way about another person's property. Says, why do I covet something? I covet something because I see it potentially as being mine. But if I really understood that it's that person's, and that's part of God's scheme, then I know it's off limits, so I wouldn't covet it. Now, we tend to think that the idea of the Ibn Ezra is he's giving an Eitzah Tova. He's giving good advice. That how can I get myself to fulfill the imperative of Lo SHMOT? Think of it as being off limits because it's part of the divine scheme. But the truth is, it's deeper than that. It's not that simply this is an Eitzah Tova, this is a good way to comply with the Lo SHMOT. What Ibn Ezra is saying is that that is the idea which underlies Lo SHMOT. Because why does the Torah say not to covet? Why does the Torah say not to be jealous? Because that is the reality. The reality is that the fact that Reuven has this, and Shimon has that, and Levi has that, is not b'mikra, it's not haphazard. That is part of the divine scheme. That is how the Rebbeinu Shalom apportioned the universe. Just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the laws of nature, every possession in this world is apportioned by the Rebbeinu Shalom. We've mentioned in the past, the famous Gemara in Masechah Sota. Everyone quotes part of the Gemara, but the Gemara says that 40 days before the conception of a child, so a heavenly voice says, Bas Plaining Leplaining, the daughter of such and such will marry such and such, that everyone knows. But it says furthermore, Bias Plaining Leplaining, such and such house is to such and such, and Sada Plaining Leplaining, such and such field is for such and such. That means that the person's assets in this world are also apportioned by the Bas Kol, by the heavenly voice. If this house is in your possession, that's your house. If it's this field in that person's possession, that's his field. That's the reality of things. That's why the Dayan who restores things to their rightful owners is really HaKadosh Baruch Hu's partner, because he's restoring God's plan for things. So this idea of seeing the things that another person has as being off limits to me is not simply an Eitzah type, but that's the essence of L'Sachmut. That's why you're not allowed to covet. And that's why it's such a central theme. In other words, L'Sachmut is not just an afterthought. It isn't just the 10th of the Aseret Dibros. It's the culmination of all the Aseret Dibros. In other words, it's the highest level. It's really the idea that not just that there is a God in the world and that we should honor Him and we should keep His Shabbos and so on and so forth. It's that the Rebbeinu Shalom is Mashgiach, He oversees, He controls, He runs the world, He apportions everything in the world. And my acceptance of that scheme is the idea which underlies Lo Sachmot. And therefore it's Dafka Lo Sachmot where the Torah elaborates the most. Not on the earlier ideas, which are more elementary, but on this highest idea of Leisachmite, this is where the Torah gives 3 entire prakim of Mishpatim in order to develop what is mine, what is his, in accordance with the divine plan, in order to properly observe the Leisachmite. We once said, many years ago, Pshat in the Gemara, it says in PARSHA Chayesara that it mentions the Bnei Ches. Now Avram brought the Saras Machpelah, mentions the Bnei Ches 10 times. 10 times. So the Medrash says that how many pens were broken, how much ink was spilled to write Bnei Ches 10 times. You know, you write with a quill pen with ink, so you sometimes break the quill, and you spill the ink. So how many quills were broken, how many bottles of ink were spilled in order to write the Bnei Ches 10 times. So why is it written 10 times? It teaches us that kol ha'mevarer mekche shel tzaddik, if a person clarifies the purchase of a tzaddik, is ki'ilu kiyam aseres hadibros, as if you fill the aseres hadibros. So the Bnei Ches who helped Avram purchase the Maras Machpelah, so they were mevarer mekche shel tzaddik, so it's as if they observed the aseres hadibros. So we asked the question, what does it mean, very strange expression, mivaver mekche shel tzaddik? They clarified the purchase of the tzaddik. I mean, they helped Avram buy it. You know, they made a shidduch between him and Ephraim, they enabled him to buy it. What's the expression, mivaver mekche shel tzaddik? They clarified. To clarify means that the thing is true in any case, and you just clarify that it's so, you demonstrate that it's so. What's the meaning of that expression? So we explain that's the idea. The idea is that when a person buys something, we think, and certainly in the mundane sense it is that way, that it became mine. Previously it was his, now I bought it, it's mine. But in the reality it's not so, because if the Bas Koil declared at the moment of conception that this house belongs to this person, and this field belongs to that person, so when I buy the field, it's not really that it became mine. At that moment, it was meant to become mine. It was decreed from the Bas Koil, from the moment of my conception, that at this point in time, this field would become mine, this house would become mine. So the purchase really is not so much something new taking place. The purchase is actually revealing what was ordained min hashamayim years and years ago. So the person who assists in that process is not being misayeh, not assisting a conveyance, he's facilitating a birur, he's facilitating a clarification. It's mevarer mekhay shel tzaddik. So the question is, why is this considered as if he was mekayim the aseres hadibros? The answer is because it's as if he was mekayim the loisachmite, which is the culmination of the aseres hadibros. The culmination of the aseres hadibros is this idea of losachma, not the covet, which is rooted in the idea that I understand that there's a plan for the world. Everything that belongs to a person is meant to be his. So the mevarer mekhay shel tzaddik, who's aimed on that and understands that I have to assist the person to get what is rightfully his, that person is as if he was mekayim the aseres hadibros. Losachma is the culmination of the aseres hadibros. So after we recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we show respect to his name by not swearing falsely, and we keep his Shabbos, and we honor parents who are God's partners, and we have respect for life, leisirtzach, and we have respect for people's spouses, which is leisinach, and we have respect for people's possessions or their liberty, which is lo signaiv, and we don't even make false statements to their detriment, which is leisana. After all those things, the culmination is leisachma, not even to desire another person's thing. That's the ultimate fulfillment. That's the understanding that this is God's world. There's a scheme, there's a plan. If he gave it to that person, it's meant to be that person's. It's off limits to me, it's not mine. That's the kiyum, that's the fulfillment of the aseres hadibros. The mevarer mekhay shel tzaddik is mekayim loi sachmait. That's the idea of Mishpatim of Klal Yisrael. It's a different thing. It's not simply to protect the weak from the strong. It's the idea because the Seder, the plan for the Bria, this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has in mind, this is what he wants. Like, my acceptance of that is the idea that I understand what's mine is mine, what's the other person's is the other person's, and that is really the fulfillment of the aseres hadibros. That's the basis of the bris, the unique covenant between Klal Yisrael and the Ribono Shel Olam. That is really kol Torah kula is clearly in accepting this idea.